I'd like to ask you, David Moore, what is the biggest risk?
The biggest risk for an investor on assets, or the biggest risk in an exchange, or what in
Yeah,
what
I'll let you frame it how you see what is the biggest risk. Could be either or.
So I think my biggest concern right now is just government changing the rules on my clients, in the middle of a transaction, or after somebody's purchased something. And I just see so many situations today where you have to look at somebody's intent and what they're trying to accomplish versus what the laws are actually they're allowing them to do versus what those laws were actually intended to do. Now, if I look at just complexity, and I'll just say as far as insurance products, I'm not a huge fan of limited liability companies for holding property. And if you look at what was proposed in Biden's Build Back Better, you rarely ever see an asset held by a corporation these days, because if you and I own an asset in a C Corp or S Corp, we just want to go different directions. Just taking the asset out of the corporation is going to trigger taxes that nullify any benefit of an exchange. You're stuck in that entity. They want to go market to market on distributions from limited liability companies too. And we talked about community versus non-community property states, even with spouses with LLCs. I've got clients that'll have a single LLC for all their properties. I've got clients that'll have an LLC for each property. I've got clients that don't use any LLCs. I would say a good stout insurance policy I'm a bigger fan of than the LLCs, because of the complexity of moving assets with the LLCs. Now, as I said, if we're in a community property state, an LLC is a lot easier to work with than it is where we live. So, that's one of my concerns. But my biggest concern right now is just the government changing the rules on stuff. And an example of that would be, here we've got the city of Portland that wants more housing. And you can argue whether you think VRBO is housing or not. Obviously people have sort of shifted, instead of long-term rentals and renting to people directly, they're going to use that mechanism so they don't have to deal with some of the rent control laws. So, the Multnomah County changes the rule. It says, okay, so we've got a number of clients with retirement accounts, self-directed IRAs, 401k plans that buy rental houses, and they were using VRBO for that thing, and it worked very well. So they've got these assets, that's property that's available, and all of a sudden the city, county, state, somebody makes the law change. So no, boom, now you can't own these things. You can't VRBO unless it's owner-occupied property. So now every client I've got that had properties used that way with a retirement account, by law, they can't occupy or use that property anyway, so that no longer fits. So everybody that had those things now has to sell them and go do something else. So it's tough when we've got bureaucrats out there changing laws on things they don't understand at all, and they change the rules. And this whole rent thing, that vacation from rent, I'm sorry to sound callous on it, but nobody's giving the landlord, that property owner, a vacation for paying the debt service, and everybody assumes that landlord is a wealthy person. And I will be the first to tell you, I've got so many clients. They are land rich, cash poor. Everything they've got in that stuff, they've worked their tails off throughout their lives to accumulate some pool of real estate, and they're not wealthy people. They need that. That's what they live off of, and they're good people. And the other thing I'm seeing a fundamental shift in is with the rent control laws and the changes in what property owners are able to do. You're seeing a lot of those people put up the white flag, and they're exchanging out of these assets they can no longer afford to deal with and into these passive investments, the DSTs, the TICs, that type of stuff. Now, what the government people don't understand, I would say, is that mom and pop that owned the property, they cared about the tenants. They knew the tenants. They really, it was a different situation for them. They cared. And by the way, that $4,300 move out charge, if you don't do it correctly, that hurts the mom and pop. Well, what do you think a REIT, a real estate investment trust? I'm seeing a fundamental shift in the ownership of our local property, going from local people to institutional ownership from somewhere else. They don't care. It's a different deal. So it's just, there's lots of things happening out there, and I think it's all calculated. And so my concerns are just rules changing, on people with really no thought from the government of the true repercussions of those changes. And I see firsthand how it impacts my clients, and it's not good. So that's what really bothers me most. As far as the insurance, the liability stuff, the LLCs, like I said, a good insurance policy is going to take care of that. The other thing that is always out there too is with, for my businesses, we're moving money all the time. So, we're concerned with all the wire fraud stuff. I mean, that's a huge thing. So having the policies, the insurance policies in place that are going to protect us, because, the business owner's got a lot of responsibility, let's say, out there, and liability if it's not taken care of correctly. So that's something, unfortunately, is just out there and seems to be growing and growing. And I really don't understand how they can't put a stop to that with a flip of a switch. Anything that's wired has to be received by somebody. I mean, you just lock down that money for 48 hours or something, don't allow it out. And I would think that would change that whole thing a lot, but nobody seems to be looking at solutions like that.